Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm going to be doing something a little different today. I'm going to title this Knife Stories. And if we look at this knife right here, these modern folders are absolutely fantastic. Super steels, space age materials like titanium, anodized. They're finely crafted and made with the best that modern technology can offer. And we love them. But in the end, what you have here, after you appreciate the construction of this knife, is just a knife. And one of the things I like about vintage knives is the history. So when you get a knife like this knife was made in the 18th century. It is finely crafted, just like the Kaiser, with the best materials available at the day. Beautiful cocobola. But this knife has a history, and those histories can be absolutely fascinating. And so, knife history on these knives can have all the elements of a blockbuster movie. They can have tragedy, drama, intrigue, mystery, all of that wrapped up into these. And oftentimes they read like a soap opera. They're absolutely fantastic. And one of the things I really enjoy about vintage knives. So today, I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to do a series called Knife Stories, where we're just talking about the history. Now, as you can see, knives are going to play a supporting role in this, but the main focus of this video is not going to be the knives. It's going to be that amazing history. And today we're going to be talking about a accomplished, fantastic cutler that came on the scene around the early 1800s in Sheffield, England, and immigrated to America. His name was Samuel Mason. And if you'd like to hear more about this amazing individual, check out the video. Good guys, welcome back to the channel for this fantastic video on an amazing cutler, Samuel Mason. And I want to say hi, welcome back to all my viewers. Bonjour, privet, guten tag, hola and ciao to my foreign viewers. And as I mentioned, today we're going to be talking about Samuel Mason. He was the son of a cutler. His father was a cutler in Sheffield, England. He was born in 1820 in the county South Yorkshire was the Sheffield area. That's where he was born. And in 1831, he was 11 years old, and he started an apprenticeship with Joseph Mappin. So the first thing I want to highlight to you is that he was 11 years old. So this was not unusual in the time of early Sheffield, or even through the 1800s. Today we look at that as child labor, taking advantage of kids, but the actuality was this was a little different. So he was being an apprentice to make fine knives like this knife right here. And this is a knife made by Joseph Mappin, the Mappin brothers. And it's a center swell, ballooned in knife, genuine ivory here. And it's just finely crafted, a beautiful knife from the early 1800s or mid 1800s, sometime in that time frame. And the second thing I want you to realize is that not only did he start his apprenticeship at 11 years old, but he did it with Joseph Mappin. So Joseph Mappin was the son of a family of Mappins who had been cutlers that stretched back into the 1700s. And they made particularly fine cutlery. And so you're talking, they were involved in high-end cutlery. And Joseph Mappin carried that family tradition on. And so he made razors, penknives, pocket knives, sportsman's knives, and they were fine cutlery. He was also involved in electroplating, silver and gold work. And so this is a type of training, Okay. It's not that, you take your average knife made in Sheffield and they're pretty good, but there were guys that were cut above. And that's a reputation that Joseph Mappin had. And he had uh, was known as one of the best companies in Sheffield, England, through much of the 1800s. And that's the training that Samuel Mason got from this guy. And so normally about 7 years is the length of an apprenticeship in Sheffield. And we know that in 1838 that Samuel Mason was making knives on his own, probably, probably with somebody, but we know he was making knives. So at 18, he is making knives. In 1844, he decided to go to America and seek his fortune there. Lucky for us. Back then, it wasn't like hopping on a plane and going to Europe like it is today, a 4 or 6 hour flight. Back then, the average was 66 days. Sometimes you got aboard ships that were faster and you can make it in 23 days. But 66 was pretty much the average. And a ship like this would have been typical of what a merchant vessel was when it came over. This is a brig, known as a brig. It's an English ship. They were 2 masts mostly, sometimes 3 masts. You can see the main mast here and the smaller one in the back. And so these vessels were only 75 foot long. And its counterpart was a Portuguese ship called a caravel. They were same length, 65 or 75 feet long. Maybe 40, 60 tons of cargo could be held in these ships. They were 3 levels and they were very, very cramped. And so these ships, even though you see gun ports here, they did not have guns. And their primary function was to bring cargo over to America and take it back to England and other parts of the world. Very dangerous journey, very cramped, very nasty, unhealthy, unsanitary conditions aboard these ships. Single men would have been up front. In the middle were families, and in the very back, they put single women so that they could be sealed off and protected from everybody else, including the crew. And so that's the route he took. When he got to America, most ships came into New York, and he did. He was penniless, and he had no friends aboard the ship. He came alone. And he met up with a guy called, let me check my notes here, William Wild. And he was a Sheffield cutler. I believe I know who this guy is. There were 3 of these Wilds who were cutlers, not related, in Sheffield. And there was a William Wild that kind of closed up shop in the prime of his life. He didn't pass away. He didn't get old. He just quit making knives in Sheffield and kind of went off the radar. I believe he came to America, and that's who Mason hooked up with. So from 1844 to 1858, we really don't know positive for sure what Samuel Mason was up to. So there's some a little bit of confusion in that area of his life. Some commenters say that he worked for Lamson and Goodnow in Shelburne Falls, Massachusetts. Other commenters say that he worked at Waterville Manufacturing Company. That's the maker of this knife right here. I did a history video on Waterville. And what I believe is that he worked at both places and had a meaningful part in establishing those companies, even though we don't have a lot of evidence for that. I'll tie that all together for you in a couple minutes. So, one, Samuel Mason had an intimate knowledge of how Lamson and Goodnow worked. He talked about it, he wrote about it, and he shared that with other people. And it was more than a passing knowledge of a company. It was the kind of information that he put out that you'd have to know just by working with them. And that's why some commenters think he worked with Lamson and Goodnow, and I think he did. So we know in 1844, Samuel Mason had a son, and he had another one in 1846, and both of those sons were born in Massachusetts. So he's definitely up in the area of Shelburne Falls and having children at this time. So I believe he probably did work with them. Also, Lamson and Goodnow was one of the oldest cutlery companies in America, but it started out in 1837. It was a supply company, like many companies started out that way. Horseshoes, staves, hoes, shovels, that kind of thing. And so in around 1844, they decide to start making cutlery. And this is a time frame that Samuel Mason is up there in that area. And so it was in that time frame, 1844 to the 1850s, that Lamson and Goodnow had developed their cutlery business. So next we see Waterville. And so actually, I think Mark Zielinski puts him at Waterville. And he was a good researcher, did a lot of research on Bowie knives up in that area. So he learned a lot more than a lot of people might learn. And I believe this is true too, because Waterville started in 1841. They had a lot of starts and stops in their cutlery. And they started making pocket knives right away, but they really didn't get going until 1847. And notice this is a time, 1846, Samuel Mason has a child, another son. He's up in Massachusetts, and I think he came down to Waterville because we know that Waterville paid higher prices for cutlers to attract them. We also know in 1847 there were 50 Sheffield cutlers working for Waterville, and that same year they started winning prizes for their cutlery, and so they made very fine cutlery. And the company also became very successful from 1947 on. And so I think Samuel Mason had something to do with that. And again, I'm going to tie all that up in a minute here. So in 1855, through poor management and bad decisions, Waterville had gone broke, but some guys took it over. B.H. Morse took control of the pocket knife portion and kept that going, and several other cutlers stayed. But most of the cutlers had gone on strike in 1852. We know that at least 12 of them went to New York and started New York Knife Company. Other ones went other places. We know that in 1858, Samuel Mason shows up in Northfield. Okay, so Northfield's only 12 miles away from Waterbury, Connecticut. This is a Northfield knife right here. It has ivory. It's a slim jack. Really cool knife. Well made. And doesn't come from that era, that time frame though. But we also know that Samuel Mason was instrumental in starting Northfield Knife Company. He talked some local businessmen into starting the company. So at this stage in 1858, Samuel Mason has 16, 17 years experience as a cutler. So, he's able to make really fine knives. And that's my point with these other companies. When he came to America, he had 12 years experience as a cutler. He was always already an accomplished cutler. And I think he made a positive difference at Lansing Goodnow. And I think he made a positive difference at Waterville Cutlery Company. And after starting at Northfield, Samuel Mason became treasurer of the company. This is a really high position. This is not the position an average cutler would take, and it shows the maturity and the depth of Samuel Mason to be put in position as a treasurer. He's also that's a principal, so he put some money into this company to start it. Probably not as much as the other contributors, but he did. And in 1862, he becomes president of Northfield Cutlery Company. He was president between 1862 and 1865. During that time frame, he patented at least 2 patents that we know of. One of them was for knives like these. So this is not a Northfield knife, but it is a cast iron knife. And Samuel Mason patented the technology to produce these cast iron scaled knives. He also did a patent on a improved tang for knives in that period of time, at least 2 that we know of. And that's why I think he played an important role in Waterville and Lansing Goodnow, because of the character, the accomplishments of the man. And you don't become a treasurer for a company and then president of the company and take out patents on knives. That doesn't just come overnight. And so I think he had a major role in these other companies. So in 1865, he's at Northfield, and he's fired in the town council actually takes over Northfield. So that's kind of weird. I've never heard of that really happening before, where a town took over a company. But that's what happened in Northfield. And then Samuel Mason is out to his own devices again. So in 1865, he starts another company in Pittsburgh called Pittsburgh Cutlery Company in Pittsburgh. He also has 3 of his sons with him, by the way, who did participate in his companies to various degrees. So they are also learning the cutlery trade. In 1866, he forms a partnership with a guy named Benz, and he forms a company, Benz and Mason. And so there's a picture that I'm showing there with Benz and Mason on it. And Benz was the son of a wealthy steel magnate in Rochester, New York. And this company went really well. Samuel Mason has told newspapers at the time that they made a 50% profit on their knives, which was incredible, a 50% return on your investment. So he's very successful. He knows what he's doing. And in 1867, a nearby town called Beaver Falls, a group of people who founded the town called the Harmony Society talked him into moving his company to Beaver Falls. That's kind of what their goal was, to bring more work to the area. And so Benz and Mason did move their company to Beaver Falls. And some of you now may be familiar with Beaver Falls. It's a rare company. They weren't in business too long, maybe 12 years, I think. But anyhow, in Beaver Falls, he started out superintendent, overseeing operations of the company, and became president of the company in Beaver Falls. So from 1967 to 1970, he was president of Beaver Falls Knife Company. So This knife here is not a Beaver Falls knife. It's a Cattaraugus knife. And as far as I know, Samuel Mason didn't have anything to do with Cattaraugus. And Cattaraugus didn't have anything to do with Beaver Falls. But what we do know is Cattaraugus, B.F. Chaplin, who started Cattaraugus, went to Beaver Falls and bought the equipment at Beaver Falls to start his company. So the equipment that made this knife here made the knives off the equipment that Samuel Mason had purchased and brought in and put at Beaver Falls. So it's kind of a residual type of effect that he has on people. And once again in 1870, he was fired. The Beaver Falls Harmony Society fired him as president. And so that's twice he's been fired from major companies, and that kind of sends red flags up to me. But in 1871, he moved and starts another company, Mason and Sons. So now it's a company with him and his sons, and that's in New Brighton, Pennsylvania. So after being there a year, he moves to Canton. My feeling is that he probably met somebody in Canton that was willing to put in some more money into the company and made it advantageous for him to move to Canton. That's usually the way those type of things work. And he moves his company to Canton and is producing and selling knives in 1872. And so in 1875, he folds up shop and he moves back to Sheffield, England. So this knife is a Canton cutlery knife. Some people think that Samuel Mason was involved in starting Canton Cutlery. So in 1879, following a patent on celluloid, clear celluloid, two companies were started in Canton, Canton Cutlery and Novelty Cutlery Company. There's really no evidence that Samuel Mason had anything to do with those companies, and the timing doesn't really work. What's more likely, though, is there's also no evidence of any other cutlery companies in Canton. So perhaps these guys who started the other companies, Stuart Carnes started Canton Cutlery Company, and August Bagano started Novelty Cutlery Company. So they may have talked to and met with and explored possibilities with Samuel Mason. I think that is likely. And one thing I think happened is that when he closed up shop and left, he didn't take his equipment with him. It's likely that either Canton Cutlery or Novelty Cutlery bought the equipment that Samuel Mason used to make their knives, because we don't know of any other knife company in that area. So I think that's probably what happened, is these companies here, again, bought their equipment to start another knife company. So when we get back to England, he starts a shoe company. That's kind of strange. But apparently he had his fill of knife companies. That lasted for about 3 years. In 1879, it's known that his shoe company failed, and he came back to America in 1880, back to the Waterville area where Northfield was, or I'm sorry, where Waterville Cutlery Company was. And his sons lived in that area, and he we know he passed away. We don't know when he passed away, what year that he passed away, but he was in that area when he passed away. So just a fantastic history of a cutler. So he's involved in cutlery in Sheffield before he comes to America. He's involved with William Wilde, who sold cutlery in America. Then he's involved with Lamson and Goodnow at the start of their cutlery career. He's involved with Waterville Cutlery Company at the start of their career. He founds Northfield Cutlery Company. He founds Benz and Mason Cutlery Company, Pittsburgh Cutlery Company, Beaver Falls Cutlery Company, and Mason and Sons Cutlery Company. So that's 9 companies overall that he's involved with. And just an amazing career for somebody that nobody knows anything about. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you found it informative. And thanks for all your support, guys.